Hilchos, Maachalos, Asuros, Perek Shisha Asar. The Laws of Forbidden Foods, chapter 16. Today we're continuing the concept of taruvos, mixtures, and bittul, nullification. Yesterday we learned a couple of principles that at a basic level, biblically, things become nullified in a majority. 1 against 2, that's rabbinic, right? So biblically it's 1 against 2 is already nullified. Rabbinically you have some things are 60, some things are 100, some things are 200. And we saw some exceptions yesterday. One of them was the davar sheyesh le matirin, an object which is going to become permitted after a while. So let's say chametz on Pesach. But on Pesach, it forbids the entire mixture, even at the smallest amount. So today we're going to deal with also a bunch more exceptions to the basic rules of nullification. Things that are not nullified as easily as 60, 100, 200. Plus, we're going to spend a lot more time on some of those 100, 200 things. Orla, fruit in the first 3 years, kilei hakerem, vineyard mixtures, and how they become nullified or actually not if you make use of them in other objects. That's where we're headed. So the Rambam begins halacha aleph. Kol hashiyurim ha'elu shenosnu chachamim, all of these amounts that we learned yesterday, which the sages gave, ledavar ha'asur shenis'arev b'minoi hamutar, for something forbidden which becomes mixed into similar type things that are permitted. It's only b'shaloi haya hadavar ha'asur mechametz oy metabel. It's only provided that the forbidden object is not a leavening agent or a spice, oy davar chashuv, or something important. It's a distinct object, which always retains its personal status and never becomes fully mixed in to the permitted substance. Well, you can't recognize it, but on its own it has an important status, and we'll soon define what that is. Aval, however, if it was a leavening agent or a spice or something important, it forbids a mixture at even the smallest amount. No 60, no 100, no 200, nothing. One thing falls into a huge mixture, the whole mixture is forbidden. Ketzad, what does this mean? Let's first talk about the leavening agent. So shel chitin shel truma, you have a leavening agent, let's call it yeast, okay? Made out of wheat of truma. So it's forbidden to a regular Jew. And this leavening agent of truma falls into a wheat dough of mundane, unholy grain. And the amount of wheat that fell in, of truma, has enough capacity to bring leaven to the entire dough. It will cause it to rise. On account of this tiny amount of truma, the entire dough is considered to be meduma. Meduma means the halachic status of truma mixed into something, and no regular Jew can eat the whole mixture, only a Kohen. Same thing if you have truma spices that fell into a pot of chulin, of unholy food, and there's enough spices to grant whatever spice is needed to this mixture, and they have the same type of the unholy food cooking in the pot, hakol meduma, the entire thing is considered to be meduma, again, with a truma status, and only a Kohen can eat it. Even if, comparatively speaking, the leavening agent or the spice is 1 to 1,000, not 1 to 60, much less. Still, it doesn't become nullified. Same thing if you have a leavening agent that grew from a vineyard mixture and is put into a regular dough, or spices procured from an arla fruit, something in its first 3 years created a spice, and you put it into a pot. Hakal asur bahana, the entire thing, even though usually kilei hakerem arla become nullified as learned yesterday, 1 in 200, here because they're leavening agent or a spice, they don't even become nullified at all. The entire mixture is forbidden to have pleasure from it. And now let's define what is the davar chashuv. Important stuff. The Rambam says, davar chashuv shehu eiser b'minoi b'kol shehu, the important things which could forbid a mixture of its type at the smallest amount, shiva dvarim. The sages said there's 7 specific items that are considered to be important stuff. The elu hein, they are the following, in no particular order on this picture. Egoize perech, walnuts from the region of Perech. Walnuts are not so important, but these walnuts were considered super important. V'rimayne badan, pomegranates from Badan, another special place. The chaviyai stumais, barrels that are closed, they're sealed, they haven't been opened yet, they're considered to be important. The chilfosh tradim, beet shoots. The kilchei kruv, cabbage stems, cabbage heads. Udlas yavanis, Greek squash. Just pick butternut squash here, but Not sure if it's exactly the butternut squash, but one of the types of squash that came from Greece. It was also an important thing. The kikarais shel balabayis, and homemade loaves of bread. Homemade loaves of bread have an important status, which now means what? What does it mean that important stuff have a different law when it comes to mixtures? Ketzad, what does it look like? Rimain echad merimaine badan shahaya arla. Let's say one of these special pomegranates that grew in badan was arla. It was in one of its first 3 years. V'nisarev bekama alafim rimainim, and mixed into many thousands of pomegranates. Hakel asur bahana, the entire mixture is forbidden to have benefit from. Why? Because the forbidden pomegranate was also a davar chashuv. It was also an important thing. High status pomegranate. V'chein chavis tu mashal yein arla. Let's say you had a shut barrel, a sealed barrel. In this barrel was wine of arla, wine produced from grapes in the first 3 years, wine produced from grapes that were grown in a mixture, in a vineyard mixture with vegetables, let's say. And shenis arva bekama alafim chaviya istuma, it's got mixed into many thousands of closed barrels. Hakal asurin bahana, they're all forbidden to have benefit from. The entire mixture is forbidden, even though it's much more than a ratio of 1 to 200. Doesn't matter. The same thing would apply to all other 7 important things. Now there's another rule, another special rule when it comes to nullification. This is known as chaticha harauya lihiskabid ba, a piece of food that can be served honorably. A piece of important food. If you don't have a problem serving it at a meal to your guest, it's considered to be distinguished for you. That also goes into the category of davar chashuv, something important which is not nullified. The Chayin says that Rambam so too, chaticha shel nevela, a cut of dead kosher meat. It wasn't slaughtered properly, so it's nevela. Oishal besar behema chaya dog hatmein, or non-kosher animal, beast, bird, fish, meat. Shenisarva bekama alafim chatichas, that got mixed into many thousands of different pieces. Hakol asur, everything is forbidden ad shiagbia. Oisa chaticha, till you remove the forbidden piece that fell in. And even after you remove the forbidden piece, that's when you begin to measure the 1 to 60. In other words, a piece of pork meat falls into a whole pot of meat. At the moment of contact, taste is going to begin to transfer from the pork meat to the rest of it. Therefore, you need to measure to see if there was 60 times the pork meat to know whether or not the piece becomes nullified. But even before you do that, you have to remove the pork meat, of course, assuming that you know where it is. Because if you don't, if you haven't removed the piece that fell in, so we have the forbidden object, in this case a piece of meat, the cut of fish, standing in the mixture without undergoing a change. And that piece you consider to be important. You would consider yourself honored to feed it to guests. You would serve a nice little brisket. People would say, oh, that's a nice piece of meat. They won't be offended to take it onto their plate. In other words, you would use this in serving guests. Therefore, it has a status of importance. It never becomes nullified if you leave it in the mixture. For hu hadin, the same thing would apply. B'chaticha shel basar b'chalav, a piece of meat that absorbed milk. It's a living mixture of milk and meat. Or shel chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, or mundane animal that has been slaughtered in the temple courtyard. We're going to see in the next set of laws, you're not allowed to slaughter a regular animal without being consecrated, without making it holy in the temple. If you did, it's forbidden. These things are forbidden to have benefit from them. Rabbinically, as will be explained in the laws of slaughtering, this last line is referring to the second case, because the first case, milk and meat, is biblically prohibited to have benefit from it. The point is, you have these pieces of mixtures, or these pieces of chulin, mundane animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard. If they fall into a mixture, you can't just say, oh, I have 60 against it, leave it in the mixture. If you know which one it is, you got to take it out, and only then measure 1 to 60 to see if taste hadn't transferred to the rest of the meat. As will be explained, similarly, gid hanasha shenis bashalim hagidin, oyim habasar, if the sciatic nerve was cooked with other sinews, other veins in the animal, or with regular meat, bisman shemakira, if you can tell it apart, magbiha v'hashar mutar, you must first lift it out of the mixture, and the rest can be permitted. She'ein begidin b'nei sentam. Here, you don't even have to measure 60, because we learned yesterday that the sinew, the sciatic nerve, doesn't transfer flavor. So its presence will forbid the mixture. Once you pick it up, everything is permitted. If you can't tell it apart, the whole mixture is forbidden, because we also mentioned this yesterday. The Gida Nasha goes into the category of what's called a creation in its own right. It's a full creature. And therefore, it also goes into the category of davar chashuv, important stuff, and does not become nullified in a mixture. So we're crossing over to yet another concept called the creature in its own right. The commentaries talk about the creature has to be alive, it has to be inherently forbidden, so not like milk and meat, it has to be by nature forbidden, like a non-kosher animal. It has to be indivisible. That means if you divide it in half, it will no longer be called by that name, and it has to actually be whole. So it has to be a whole fly, let's say. If you cut a fly in half, it's not a fly, now you have a half a fly. So here, rabbinically, we consider the sciatic nerve to be a full creation in its own right, and therefore, as long as it's present in the mixture, the whole mixture is forbidden. V'chein kol ba'alei chayim. Similarly, all living animals, chashuvin hein ve'enan betelin, in their lifetime, they are considered to be a davar chashuv, an important thing, and will not become nullified in a mixture. And therefore, lefichach, shayr hanisko. If you have an ox that needs to be stoned, if an ox kills a person, it needs to be killed. So if you have this ox waiting to be killed, it's on death row, and it gets mixed into 1,000 other oxen, the egla arufa be'elef agoles, or the calf that's meant to have its neck chopped off. This is one of the special cases in Torah. Yes, you find a dead body, you don't know who killed him. The nearest city has to bring a special calf to a certain area, cut off its neck from the back. It's called egla arufa. We're going to talk about the system later in the Rambam. And let's say you designated this calf to be used for this procedure, and it got mixed into another 1,000 calves. Oy tzipar mitzayra hashchuta be'elef tziparim. Or the bird of the person with tzarat that's meant to be slaughtered. The person who gets tzarat, a lesion on his skin or on his clothes or on his home, when it becomes pure, he has to bring a sacrifice of 2 birds. One of the birds is sent away, and one of the birds is meant to be slaughtered. So if the bird that's meant to be slaughtered, before it was slaughtered, got mixed into another 1,000 birds, oy peter chamoyer be'elef chamoyrim, or a firstborn donkey, special mitzvah that we have, like redeeming a firstborn son. We redeem the firstborn donkey, give it to the Kohen. If that donkey got mixed into another 1,000 donkeys, in all these 4 cases, the ox, the calf, the bird, and the donkey, kula nasurin bahana, they're all, the whole mixture, the 1,000 donkeys, the 1,000 calves, the 1,000 oxen, are all forbidden to have benefit from them, because the live animals are considered to be important in their lifetime, don't become nullified. Aval shara dvarim, but any other thing, afal pisha darkon limones. Even if usually you count them out by a certain number, let's say a dozen eggs, right? So the eggs, by their number status, might seem to have some importance. Hare elu oilin bishura. No, it doesn't make them important. They can get canceled in their regular amounts of 60, 100, or 200. Forgive all the background noise. Just a lot of commentary from the other side of the shul. Halacha ches. Ketzat. What does this mean that something which could be counted will still become nullified regularly? Aguda shel yarak mikili akarem. You have a bunch of vegetables that were planted in a vineyard. So it's forbidden on account of being kili akarem. It's been planted as a mixture in a vineyard. Shenis arva b'masayim agudais. And this mixture, this bundle of celery, got mixed into another 200 bundles. So by the laws of kili akarem, it is nullified. Or an arla etrog. Etrog is in the first 3 years of growth. It's actually forbidden. Some guy who was an etrog merchant picked off this arla etrog, and it got mixed into another 200 etrogs. Even though in both of these cases it's customary to count out these things, people sell celery in bundles, people sell etrogs in groups of whatever, a dozen, let's say. Nevertheless, since it becomes mixed into 200, hakol mutter, it's all permitted. V'chein kol kayetze b'zeh, any similar situation. This is called in the Shulchan Aruch darkei limonos, or davar shebeminyan. Something which is usually counted, it becomes nullified according to the Rambam in its regular state. Halacha teskei royally, it seems to me. Shekol davar shehu chashuv eitzel b'nei makom min ha'mekaymes. Anything which in a current society is considered important to the people of this place, like those walnuts and pomegranates that I showed you before. When they came from Perech, walnuts were important. When they came from Badan, pomegranates were important. But those aren't universally for all time. If later on in Sherman Oaks there's a specific object that's considered to be important, like those were important in those times, it will also forbid an entire mixture at the smallest amount in any place, in that place and in that time. The only reason we mentioned these 7 objects was because they forbid a mixture at any amount in every place. But the same law applies to anything else in any similar place which would have a similar important status. Of course, it's a clear thing. All these prohibitions are only rabbinic because they're not biblical in nature. The rabbi said because it's important, we're not going to let it become nullified in a mixture. So, let's talk about secondary mixtures. Halacha Yud. Follow this case, please. Nafal rimain echad min ha'ta'aruvas hazos lishnei rimainim acherim merimainei badan. You have now, like this. This is the important mixture. This is the important pomegranate, but it's also forbidden. This is a pomegranate of Arla, let's say. It's in its first 3 years. It falls into a mixture of 1 to 2. These are also important pomegranates. It's a bit inaccurate, this picture. The word chashuv should be on all 3. They're all important. Just one of them is a forbidden entity. It falls into a mixture. And now, one of these pomegranates, nafal rimain echad min ha'ta'aruvas hazos, lishnei rimainim acherim merimainei badan. One of the pomegranates in this mixture falls into 2 other pomegranates of also badan pomegranates. So, again, this word here should not be chashuv, it should be asur. The forbidden one now is in question. Let's say in this mixture, this was the forbidden one, right? Now it falls into another mixture. Now you don't know which is the forbidden one, but they're all of important status. And then from this group of 3, a pomegranate falls into 2 other pomegranates. This what's called the ta'aruvas shlishis. The third mixture is totally permitted. Why? You have what's called double doubt, svek sveka. Because at this point, the pomegranate from the first mixture has been nullified biblically in a majority of 1 to 2. And because it's a double doubt, the rabbis ignored their special status of important stuff. However, if it would only stop over here, one of the pomegranates got mixed into this. This is the first mixture. Then a pomegranate falls into a second mixture. At this point, they're still not permitted. Kulan asurin. Even if it's 1,000, they're all forbidden. We only employ the idea of biblically nullified in a majority to allow a double doubt. See, when a pomegranate falls into this, now you don't know where the pomegranate is. When a pomegranate from here falls into here, you don't even know if that forbidden pomegranate fell in here at all. It's a double doubt. Therefore, at this point, it's all going to be permitted. But at this point, we're still in doubt. It's only one doubt. And therefore, the whole mixture remains forbidden on account of the important status of that forbidden pomegranate. The double doubt means if it falls from the second mixture to a third mixture, we're not going to forbid it. And any similar cases. But as long as it's still in the second mixture, it's all forbidden. Interesting to point out that if you look back at our video from the laws of idol worship, in chapter 10, I believe it is, or chapter 7, excuse me, the Rambam allows, when it comes to idol worship, if a goblet that was used for idol worship gets mixed into a second mixture, the whole mixture is permitted. So some of the commentaries say that the Rambam over here changed his mind, but the Kesef Mishnah writes that idol worship is different. Everyone knows about the prohibition, so at the second mixture, the rabbis already permitted it. But here, the concept of a davar chashuv is less known, so the rabbis were more strict. Or he says that in idol worship, we're talking about using, benefit, so we're more lenient. Here we're talking about eating, so we're more strict. Halacha Yud Aleph. Mispatzu egoizim elu shenesru kulan mipnei egoiz arla shabeneim. If the walnuts, which caused the huge mixture to become forbidden, cracked open. So here I already put cracked walnuts, but let's just imagine that it was the whole walnuts. Okay, the whole walnuts were the important walnuts. One of them was arla. One of them was from the first 3 years. Got mixed into another 1,000 walnuts and forbade the whole mixture. Now, as they are forbidden, all the walnuts get cracked. Or the pomegranate, same thing, they were opened. You had a pomegranate, an important pomegranate of Arla was forbidden, got mixed into another 1,000 pomegranates. Doesn't get nullified, but now they're all cracked open. Same case if it was a case of barrels. The barrels were open. The squash were cut open. The loaves were cut. After they became forbidden. They can now be counseled at the regular rate of 1 to 200. Same thing in the case of the chaticha, this piece of food that can be served honorably, the piece of meat that got lost in the pot. And it was ground together with all the cuts of meat. So the status has changed. And everything became like one big mixture. Now it can be cancelled in 60. You don't have to remove that piece. However, initially you cannot do that. You cannot crack the nuts or open the pomegranates or open the barrels after they became forbidden, so that they should become counseled 1 to 200, because we cannot actively, initially, cancel prohibitions. Now, the commentaries discuss this because the Rambam said yesterday that when it comes to rabbinic prohibitions, you could actively nullify a prohibition, and these prohibitions are all rabbinic. A lot of discussion. There's not really a clear consensus on it. So just bring up the issue and that's it. If you did so, if you did actively nullify it, we penalize him. We forbid the entire mixture upon him, as we explained. Halacha Yud Gimel, we return now to the initial topic of mechametz and metabel, leavening agent and a spice. Two elements combined to make yeast. Yeast made out of a vineyard mixture and of truma. So wheat that was truma, or whatever the source of it, turned into yeast. Wheat that was grown in a vineyard mixture turned into yeast. Now you have a combination of truma and kilei kerem yeast. And they fell into a dough. Neither on its own has the capacity to cause the entire dough to rise. But if you combine the two, they will be able to make the dough rise. Says the Rambam, this dough is forbidden to regular Jews, but it's permitted to a Kohen. Even though you have some vineyard mixture, yeast mixed into it, it's still permitted to a Kohen because the vineyard mixture on its own is not powerful enough to make it forbidden. You have a mixture of spices from truma and from vineyard mixtures. Fell into a pot, neither one on its own can spice up the whole pot, but together they can. That pot is forbidden to a regular Jew, because for the Jew, his pot has been spiced by totally forbidden substances, but it's permitted to a Kohen, because the Kohen, only half of it is forbidden. The truma part is permitted to him, and the kilei kerem doesn't have enough to spice up the whole pot, therefore it's nullified by the regular rules of 1 to 200.
So there's no bottle status here, because it's half and half.
Huh?
The reason why a Yisrael can't eat it is because it's still half and half.
The reason why the Yisrael can't eat it is because in total, what spiced up his pot is a forbidden mixture. And in the beginning of the period, the Rambam says that when you're dealing with a metabel, it's never bottle, even in 1,000. But for the kohen, because the truma part is not considered, he's fine with the truma. All he has is the kilei kerem. The kilei kerem is not powerful enough to spice it up, so it's not considered a metabel. Therefore, it's now subject to the regular laws of bittul, 1 to 200, and therefore it's cancelled. Assuming, of course, is 1 to 200. Halacha Yudalet. Tavlin shehem shnayim or shloisha shemais mimin echad. A spice that is all of one species, but carries 2 or 3 types of status or prohibition. Or shloisha minin mishem echad. Or 3 species, all of the same halachic status. Mitzdarfin letabel v'leser v'chein lechametz. Can combine to together spice a pot or be a leavening agent for the dough. Ketzah, what would that mean? Sa'ir shel chitin u'sa'ir shel sa'irim. Yeast produced from wheat, yeast produced from barley. Hoyel v'shem sa'ir echadu. Since yeast is one name, it's one concept. Einon kimin v'she'enai minai. We don't treat the yeast from the wheat and the yeast from the barley as a mixture of different types. Elaharehin kimin echad. They're considered one unit. Umitztaref l'shar bahen kedei lechametz be'isa shel chitin im hayatam shneim tam chitin. If together both yeasts tasted like wheat, they can combine to be considered a leavening agent for a wheat dough. Or if they're both tasted together like barley, they can combine together to be a leavening agent for a barley dough. Tesvav, Shleisha, Shemes, Mimin, Echad, Ketzad. What does it mean? 3 different names from one species. Kigoin, Karpas shel Naharais, Karpas shel Afar, Karpas shel Gina. Like parsley. Parsley from a marsh, parsley from a river, parsley from a garden. They're all parsley. Even though each one carries its own name. If you went to the organic section in the supermarket, God forbid to mix marsh parsley with garden parsley, with river parsley. Since the bottom line is they're one type, they're parsley. Mitzdarf and the tabel, they can all combine to be considered one spice unit for a pot and not become nullified in that pot.
Assuming they probably look like each other.
Yeah, probably. I would have to assume so. Halacha Tezayin. Isa mechumetzes, a dough was already risen. There was a leavening agent already inside it that caused it to rise. Shenafal l'toicha sa'ir shel truma sa'ir shel kili akarem. And now, more yeast, forbidden yeast, falls in. Truma yeast, vineyard mixture yeast falls in. V'chein kedera mitubeles shenafal l'toicha tavlin shel truma or shel arlav or shel kili akarem. Or a pot was already spiced. And now more spices fall in. Truma spices, arla spices, kili akarem spices. Im yesh basa'ir kedei lechametz. Ilu ha'isa ha'isa matzah, you would think that it's already spiced. So why are new spices going to contribute? No, says the Rambam. If, take away the current yeast, had this yeast fallen into the dough plain, it would have been able to cause the dough to rise. Ubetavlin kedei letabal akdeira, ilu ha'isa tfeila. And with the pot, were it to be unspiced, is there enough spices falling in now from the forbidden spices that could spice the pot? Also, the entire thing is forbidden. But if, had they been acting alone, they wouldn't be powerful enough to spice the pot or to leaven the dough, they can be nullified in their regular amount. Truma be'echadumeya, v'arla v'kili akarem be'echadu masayim, truma in 1 to 100, and the arla and kili akarem can go 1 and 200 as we learned yesterday. Now the Rambam says something very interesting. Different forbidden substances can work to nullify other forbidden substances. Hatruma male sa'arla ve'eskili akarem. Truma, produce, can help nullify arla, produce, or vineyard mixture, produce. Ketzad, what does that look like? Sa'at truma, shenafla l'tisha v'tishim chulin. You have 99, obviously an inaccurate picture, but you have 99 sa'ah measurements. Sa'ah is a dry measurement from the halachic times. 99 measurements of mundane, unholy flour. Into them falls one measure of truma. For truma, 1 to 99 is no good. So the whole mixture now becomes considered to be like truma status. And then a half a measure of arla, or a half a measure of kili akarem flour falls in. So, if you think about it, with the 1 plus the 99, now you have 100 full measures. That's 200 times the half. So the truma is combining with the chulin to nullify the arla. Ein kan isur arla v'loy isur kili akarem. You don't have over here any prohibition of arla or vineyard mixture. Shaharei Allah be'echadu masayim. Because it's been nullified at 1 to 200. Even if part of the 200 working against it is truma. But the arla prohibition gets cancelled. Of course, the truma does not. And this mixture can only be eaten by kohanim. Cannot be eaten by a regular Jew. But the point is the truma is helping to nullify the arla. B'chein, same the other way. Ha'arla v'kili akarem malin esat truma. The arla and the kili akarem can help cancel truma. How does this work? And the Rambam uses much bigger numbers here because if you go into the math, as the commentators explain, it only works with big numbers. Ketzat. Meya sa'a shel arla or shel kili akarem shenaflu l'seich esrim elef shel chulin. 100 measures of arla or vineyard mixture grapes, let's say, fell into 20,000 measures of chulin. So we have, wait, that's a mistake there. I should say 100. 100 into 20,000. This is 1 to 200, right? That's nullified. Hare, what does he say here? Nasas kala ta'aruvis esrim elef umeya. You now have a total of 20,100. Again, a mistake here. This should be 100, not 200. You have 20,100 total. Then, for every 100 measures, you had one measure of truma. One measure of truma is nullified in 100 measures of other stuff. So here, even though within every 100 measures there's going to be a ratio of 1 to 200 of arla kilei kerem, but they can nevertheless combine for the total and help nullify the truma. Harei hakol mutar, it's all permitted. V'tal lehatruma be'echad umeya, and the truma will all be nullified in 1 to 100. V'afal pi shemiktas hameya hamaylin, even though part of the 100, by definition, that are nullifying it are arla or kilei kerem, are arla produce or kilei kerem produce. But it's fine because they can help to combine to the mixture. V'chein ha'arla mailes kilei kerem, the kilei kerem es arla. These two themselves can work with each other. The arla produce and the kilei kerem, forbidden vineyard produce, can cancel each other out. The kilei kerem es kilei kerem, the ha'arla es arla. All combinations can work with each other. Arla can help arla and kilei kerem can help kilei kerem and arla. Keita, what does that look like practically? And again, the Rambam goes with massive numbers. Mosayim sa'ashal arla, aishal kilei kerem, shenaflu la'arbayim elef chulin. You had 40,000 measures of mundane. Into it fell 200 of arla kilei kerem. Right here at this point, they became nullified. 200 to 40,000 is 1 to 200. The achar kach, and then nafal lechol masayim sa'ashal arla, aishal kilei kerem, into this 40,200 mixture, as it was divided into groups of 100. Groups of 200. Into every 200 fell in a measure of arla or kilei kerem. Hakol mutar, it's all permitted. Shekevan shebatal ha'isur shenafal techila. Because since in the initial stage, the first prohibition was nullified, when the 200 fell into the 40,000, they became nullified. Nasa hakol kechulin hamutardim. The whole mixture becomes like regular mundane food, and when the next group of arla kilei kerem falls in, they can help to nullify. This ties into a concept in halacha that's called chayzer v'neir. It reawakens. Sometimes you say that when a prohibition falls into a mixture and is nullified, and then more of that same prohibition falls in, it wakes up its friend, and now together you have more prohibited food. Here the Rambam says we don't say that. When the first one fell in initially, nullified, it's totally lost. Now when more falls in, it can combine to nullify that one too. So we're talking a lot about arla and kilei kerem. So the Rambam gets more into these things if you use them in producing other objects. Says the Rambam halacha chaf, beged shetzvoi b'klipei arla. A piece of clothing was dyed with shells of arla fruit. Shells of arla fruit can serve as the base for a dye, for clothing dye, and you used it and you dyed a piece of clothing. Yisarif, the whole clothing has to be burnt. Yisarif ba'acherim, if that clothing got mixed into other pieces of clothing, yale be'echadu masayim, like regular arla, it can be nullified 1 to 200. V'chein tavshil should bishlei b'klipei arla. Upas shafa b'klipei arla b'kilei kerem. Same thing if you had a cooked dish that you cooked. Of course, this is an oven of today where there's gas ranges, but let's say it was an olden day oven where you had to put in wood or you had to put in fuel to the oven. And you fueled the pot or the bread with arla shells or with kilei kerem shells. Yisaref hatavshil va'apas, the cooked dish and the bread must be burnt. Because the pleasure that you're deriving from the arla is clearly present in them. They were the fuel used to cook the object. If they got mixed into other things, then they have to be nullified in 1 to 200. Same thing if it's a piece of clothing where not the whole clothing was dyed with arla. A part of the thread was dyed with arla. What's called the sit size. A sit is the space between the first and second finger. It's a sit. And you dyed that much thread with arla shells, and you sewed it into or wove it into a piece of clothing. You don't know which one it is. It should be nullified 1 to 200. If what's called like powdered dye, the powder used to create a dye, part of it was made from arla, part of it was made from other permitted substances, so they haven't yet actually done the dye. The powder got mixed. Yalu be'echadu masayim, right away at this point, they can be nullified 1 to 200 because nothing's actually been dyed yet. Meitzeva b'meitzeva, liquefied dye of arla got mixed into liquefied dye of other substances. Yibatal b'roiv. As long as there's a majority the whole substance is permitted because there's no mamoshos. There's no substance of the actual prohibition. It's all liquid. Plus, at the end of the day, whatever you're going to use this dye for is going to be mostly of permitted substance. When you already sewed it into the clothing, you already dyed it, so the piece of thread is walking, talking arla. Therefore, it makes the whole clothing forbidden. But while it's still dye, it's permitted. If you did heat up an oven using the shells of arla or kilei kerem produce, bein chadash, bein yasham, whether the oven is new or old, yutzan, you must first let it cool down, and then you can reheat it with permitted wood. Were you to cook something in it, or bake something in it, bread or cooked dish, before it cooled down, whatever you will cook will be forbidden to have benefit from it. Because the improvement, the enhancement that's added by the prohibited fuel is in the bread or the cooked dish. If you had cleaned out all the fuel and you cooked or baked in the oven while it was hot, but just with the natural heat of the oven, there's no actual fuel, then it's permitted, because the body of the prohibited wood left the oven. Plates and cups and pots and jugs that a potter fired up with shells of arla produce. They are forbidden for benefit. Because an object which is forbidden to have benefit from it was used in the process of renewing it. If you bake bread on coals made from arla wood, mutaris, it's permitted. Once you've converted the wood into coal, the prohibition leaves it, even if they're glowing and they're on fire. You have a pot which you cooked with a combined mixture of the shells of arla or kilei kerem and permitted wood. And we're going to see in a moment that it wasn't together. It was a combination in the sense that you used both in the process of cooking. But you first used the forbidden ones, then you used the permitted ones. So whatever is cooked in that pot is forbidden. Even though you have two forces joining together, both the forbidden and the permitted join to cook this pot. Nevertheless, when it was being cooked by the forbidden substances, the permitted wood hadn't yet been there. It's not simultaneously being cooked by both substances. Part of the cooking was with permitted wood, part of the cooking was with forbidden wood. Now, while the literal meaning of this halacha looks like it's talking about that you cooked the dish with a mixture of permitted and forbidden substances, the Kesef Mishnah explains that it's talking about, it's backtracking. If you fired the pot originally with such a mixture, first forbidden wood, then permitted wood, then later whatever you're going to cook in it is going to become forbidden because it was fired with a forbidden substance. So you have an orchard. There was a sapling that was in its first 3 years. All the other saplings were already past the 3 years, but it got mixed up. You lost track which was the one. You have a patch where a vineyard was mixed with forbidden substances, and the rest of the patches were not, but you lost track of it. What you should do is, you gather all the produce of all the patches or all the trees together. And if the sapling was 1 to 200 against the other saplings, or the patch was 1 to 200 against the other patches, then whatever you gathered is permitted. But if it's less than 1 to 100 in the ratio, whatever produce you gathered is forbidden. Now, why do we say this? First gather, then measure. Why did the sages allow you to pick all the produce? Shouldn't it be the law? Let's forbid everything till he bothers himself and figures it out and removes the forbidden sapling or the forbidden patch. And if he can't, then it should all be forbidden. Says the Rambam, why would we want to be strict on him? We want to be strict because we think that he's going to purposely mix in forbidden substances or patches. But we have a presumption that a person knows that. He's not going to forbid his entire vineyard with one little sapling. If he would know about it, he would take it out. He comes to the rabbi because he doesn't know. He's in doubt. So in this case, we're going to be more lenient on him, and therefore we're going to say, gather all the produce, measure if it's 1 to 200, then you're good. Another principle related to arla, but also related to all mixtures in general. Hamamid gvina bisraf page arla. If you curdle cheese using the sap from arla figs, or with the stomach lining of an animal which was sacrificed to idols, with the vinegar made from wine from idol worship, all the cheese is forbidden completely, even though it's a mixture of different types, even though it's the tiniest amount. We had this principle a few times already. Because the forbidden substance is very obvious, very clearly distinguishable, and it's what made it into cheese. The catalyst, the starter, was called davar hamamid in Hebrew. And since the whole base of the cheese is forbidden, the whole cheese is forbidden. Ha'arla v'kili akarem, says the Rambam. Arla and kili akarem fruits, dina peres shalahan sheyisarfu. Their produce, raw produce, has to be burnt. The hamashkin shalahan yikavru. Any juices produced from them should be buried. You can't burn liquids, so you have to bury it. Chavches yayin shenis nasich la'avodas kechavim shenis arevim hayayin. Here's where the Rambam puts the principle that I mentioned yesterday. I thought it was in yesterday's chapter, but it's in today's chapter. When you have yayin nesach, okay, forbidden wine, and it gets mixed into other wine, hakol asur bahana bekolshu k'meisha amarnu. It's all forbidden to have benefit from it, as we said yesterday. However, bamed dvarim amurim, when is this said? B'shehurak hayayin hamutar al tipa shel yayin nesach. It's when the permitted wine was poured over the forbidden wine. Avalim eira yayin nesach mitziltzul katan. But if you're pouring forbidden wine from a little vessel into a big cistern full of kosher wine, then actually afilu eira kol hayom kula, even if there was so much that you're pouring all day, rishain batal. As the drops enter the cistern, they become successively nullified. Eira min hachavis, if you're pouring from a big barrel, bein she'eira min hamutar la'asr, min ha'asr la'mutar, whether you're going from permitted to forbidden, forbidden to permitted, hakal asr, it's all forbidden. Because the stream that comes from a barrel is much bigger. But from a bottle or a small thing, it would actually be okay in this case, if the forbidden wine is being poured into the permitted. If permitted is being poured into forbidden, it's always forbidden. But if forbidden is being poured into permitted, it depends if it's a big stream or a small stream.
So, but you have to splash it each time, or no?
It sounds like even if it's pouring straight, as long as the amud is not big, it becomes batal. Nisarev stam yenam biyayin. If it wasn't actual libation wine, it was just Gentile wine, got mixed into regular wine. So we said it's only forbidden to be drunk at the smallest amount. You can have benefit from it. You sell the whole thing to a guy. Whatever the money equivalent to the amount of forbidden wine in the mixture, you destroy. And you can have pleasure from the rest of the money. If a barrel of forbidden wine gets mixed into a bunch of barrels of permitted wine, they're all forbidden to drink, but permitted to have benefit from it. When you sell the whole mixture of barrels to the guy, whatever money he paid you for that forbidden barrel, you bring it to the Dead Sea, destroy it. And the same for sure applies to a barrel of regular Gentile wine, not actually used in idol worship. Halacha lamid mayim shenisarvu beyayin or yayin b'mayim. If water and wine mix, not wine and wine, water and wine mix, b'neisin tam, we follow the regular rules of discerning taste. Because it's a mixture of different types. When do we say this? If the permitted substance fell into the forbidden substance. But if the forbidden substance fell into the permitted liquid, rishain batal, as it gets in there, little by little it becomes nullified. So long as you're pouring from a small little vessel where the stream comes out little by little. How could you have a case of forbidden water? Forbidden wine, I understand. How do you have forbidden water? If they were being served, someone served the river, or they were used in an offering to an idol worship. Lamed Aleph. Ber shel yayin shenafal l'seichei kitin shel mayim tchila. You have a cistern of wine. It's full of wine. Then a little jug of water falls into it first. The achar kach nafal l'seichei yayin nesech, and then the forbidden wine falls in. So there's regular wine, water, and then forbidden wine. We treat the permitted wine as if it's not there, and we have the battle between the water and the forbidden wine. We first measure the water against the forbidden wine. If the quantity of the water is big enough to cancel the taste of the forbidden wine, the water on its own fights, so to speak, or increases over the wine, overpowers, that's the word I'm looking for, overpowers the wine and cancels it. Now the whole mixture is permitted. Had it just been the wine on the wine, the whole thing would be forbidden. But because the water is battling the wine and the water cancels the wine, so it cancels it for the rest of the kosher wine as well, and the whole mixture is permitted. We have forbidden wine, falls onto a pile of grapes. Wash them off and they're permitted. But if they were a little bit cracked, whether the wine was old or new, if the wine transmits taste into the grapes, Asuros, all the grapes are also forbidden to have benefit from it. If not, then they're even permitted to be eaten. If the forbidden wine fell onto figs, then all the figs are permitted, no matter what. Because the wine taste impairs the taste of the figs. As we saw yesterday, tam lifgam, when you introduce a bad taste, it doesn't get governed by those laws, it's always nullified. If forbidden wine falls onto wheat, they cannot be eaten, but they can be benefited from. However, don't sell it to a guy, because he might resell it to a Jew. What should you do? Grind the wheat. Make some bread. Sell it to an idol worshiper when there's no Jew present. And this way, no Jew will buy the bread from the non-Jew. Because, as we'll explain tomorrow, bread in the possession of a non-Jew is forbidden. So you make the bread, give it to the non-Jew, and this way you'll preclude any Jew from buying it. How come in this case we didn't check first to see how much wheat there was? Maybe the taste of the wine is nullified in the wheat. Wheat is very absorbent. The wine will be completely swallowed into them. You won't be able to tell how much wine is there, and therefore it wouldn't work. What happens if forbidden wine became vinegar? And in its vinegar state, it fell into vinegar that came from beer. Since they're both vinegar, in their starting position, there were two opposite types. One was wine, one was beer. But in their current position, they're both vinegar. It forbids the mixture in its smallest amount. Because now it's a mixture of the same type. They're both vinegar. But if wine mixed with vinegar, whether the vinegar fell into the wine or the wine into the vinegar, we estimate it with the taste discernibility. If you can taste the forbidden wine in the vinegar, then it's forbidden. If not, then it's permitted.